but if you're someone who cares about military spending and reining in government spending, then you should care about Julian Assange. If you're someone who cares about civil liberties and civil rights of minorities, not just in America, but across the globe, then you should care about Julian Assange, because unfortunately, some of our governments are involved in some corrupting activities that he helped expose. So there's a whole list of reasons you should care about Julian Assange, no matter where you fall on the political spectrum. And one of the biggest things I took away from that Twitter Spaces was that this is really an issue about freedom of speech. This is really an intimidation thing that's happening right now. And right now, trust in mainstream media is at an all-time low. And that's because a lot of mainstream media is not telling the truth. And Julian Assange's case makes them feel like if they try to tell the truth, maybe they're going to end up like Julian. So,
exactly.
Exactly. So it's important for an entire host of reasons. Most importantly, we need freedom of speech. We need to be able to express ourselves without fear of being put in jail. And we have to be able to get accurate information. And Julian Assange is a really big part of that. So both you and I are big supporters of RFK Jr. for many reasons. And as you can see, I have the shirt on right now. So
nice.
Last episode, Maury had the
good.
shirt. So, I had to represent this time and wear the shirt this time.
Your turn.
Exactly, my turn this time. So with that being said, can you talk a little bit more about how you think RFK's election could impact Julian Assange's situation?
It's everything. I mean, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is the only hope for Julian Assange. He's the only presidential candidate, at least a presidential candidate who has a real chance of winning, and I believe that he does. I know a lot of naysayers say he's a long shot and he doesn't stand a chance, but I beg to differ. I think he's certainly number 3 in this race right now. When you look at the polls, you've got Biden, Trump, and Kennedy. This is kind of a 3-way race right now. So that tells me he's got a real chance to get there. And he's the only one who has a chance, who has pledged unequivocally to pardon Julian Assange on day 1, because he does not want this man to suffer one more day. If he could pardon him today, he would, but he can't because he's not president yet. So we have to make him president. But I know that he's good for that promise. I know he cares about Julian, unlike others who have sort of danced around that question when they're asked. Looking at you, Donald Trump. Donald Trump's got all these excuses.
Yeah, you remember during the campaign, he said he loves WikiLeaks. WikiLeaks is great. Like, he said all these positive things about WikiLeaks during the campaign, but then he got into office and all of a sudden he forgot what WikiLeaks was and he couldn't remember Julian Assange. So I don't know.
And then he had him arrested. Let's not forget that was Donald Trump's administration. That was Trump's DOJ that went after Julian Assange, arrested him, dragged him out of the embassy, and charged him with 18 or 17 counts of espionage plus a computer hacking charge. So in all, if he's convicted on all counts, and I fear that he will be if he's extradited to the States, because national security cases, you just can't win against the federal government. It would be precedent setting if he did win his case. But yeah, every national security whistleblower has lost in court against the federal government. So if he's convicted on all of those counts, he could be facing a maximum sentence of 175 years.
Wow.
Which is unconscionable. It's cruel and unusual.
For telling the truth.
For telling the truth, for doing journalism, for doing what reporters like me and other national security journalists do on the regular. That's all he did, as far as I can tell. And I've looked into this case. I've taken a deep dive on this case. I've been a supporter of Julian's since the very beginning of WikiLeaks, and I have never seen a shred of evidence that he did anything illegal or anything wrong. Now, of course, the whistleblowers themselves who leaked the documents to WikiLeaks, they technically broke the law. And, they often do long prison sentences. Chelsea Manning was sentenced to 35 years for leaking collateral murder and cables and other documents to WikiLeaks. President Obama commuted that sentence to 7 years. But even Obama didn't give Chelsea Manning a full pardon. There's a difference between a commutation and a pardon. And a pardon is a full dismissal of all the charges against you. But that's not what happened with Manning. So Kennedy has also said that he would pardon Chelsea Manning and Edward Snowden and other national security whistleblowers who revealed information that was in the public interest and did not harm the United States. And I think that's a very sane and reasonable way to treat these cases. But in the case of Julian Assange, you can count on Kennedy for that. That's a promise he will keep.
I agree, and I think it's such an important task to really protect these people, because how else are we really going to get to the bottom of a lot of this corruption that's happening in government without some of these people brave enough to step forward and tell their stories and let people know what's happening behind the scenes? And with Edward Snowden in particular, the information that he gave to us, it actually led to laws being passed in an effort to protect people's privacy. So, what he did was, by every reasonable measure, a public service to the country, not just to the country, but to the world. So, he is also someone who deserves to be pardoned. So I'm glad you brought him up, as well as Chelsea Manning. All of these people really put it on the line to tell the truth. And I think that's something, even a lot of people in the healthcare community, can definitely take a look at right now, because with everything happening with the pandemic and the COVID response, trust, not just in government, but even in the healthcare community, is at an all-time low. And we have to figure out, how do we rebuild this trust? And I think people telling the truth and coming forward is one of the best ways to get there. So,
you just brought up a great point about the healthcare during the pandemic, and I'll be careful because I know you're going to put this on YouTube. So I'll be
this
careful.
is going on Rumble.
Oh, good.
Clips will get chopped up on YouTube, so let it all out. We're on Rumble
good.
right
Okay,
now.
so I can just say what I really think.
Yes,
okay.
Say what you really think.
Think about this. Julian Assange was arrested in April of 2019. And for all intents and purposes, WikiLeaks just stopped publishing after that, because without Julian, there is no WikiLeaks. Now think what we would know about the lies we were told by governments around the world during the pandemic, during the lockdowns, about the vaccines and all that stuff. Think of what we might know today had WikiLeaks been able to publish during the pandemic. Think of what healthcare professionals and people inside these government regulatory agencies, like the CDC, like the FDA, imagine if they had been able to leak this info to WikiLeaks, because the mainstream media was not going to publish any such revelations from public health whistleblowers. And also think about what we would know right now about the war in Ukraine if WikiLeaks were still able to do their job. There's so much information that we have been denied since Julian went to prison. And that's why I want him out of prison. I want him home with his family. And as soon as he's rested and able, I want him back on the job. I want WikiLeaks back. We should all want WikiLeaks back.
Exactly, because we have to ask ourselves, what kind of world are we really okay with? Like, all you have to do is go watch the movie V for Vendetta. I know a lot of people, nowadays may not read as much. So otherwise, if you can't read 1984 by George Orwell, then you should definitely go watch V for Vendetta. Exactly.
It's one of my favorites.
Yeah, it is. It is. It is, because we really have to ask ourselves, do we really want to live in a society where we can't speak freely? We're all under the the WEF, there's no private property, and we can't spend our money how we want, because that's what we're moving towards. And that's one of the reasons actually why I'm very excited about the RFK campaign, because he's the only person out of those three candidates who is really diving into the details regarding that the NGO corruption and the corruption that the private sector really has on the government. And don't get me wrong, both Trump and Biden will pay lip service to it. Trump will say he's against the globalists. He will say all these things, but then when he gets into office, there's like minimal progress in one or two areas, and then a lot of regression, like in other areas. And with
don't
Biden,
forget, by the way, when Trump was president, he spoke at the World Economic Forum in Davos twice. I think the first time was in 2018, and in 2020, literally as the pandemic was just getting started. This would have been like, I think, February or so of 2020. It was the last in-person meeting at Davos, and then they canceled the meetings in person for the next couple of years because of the pandemic. But yeah, Trump was the keynote speaker at Davos. Wow. So there he was with Klaus Schwab shaking hands with his buddy Klaus. So, it's hard for me to understand how Trump voters square that if they are against the lockdowns, against the World Economic Forum agenda to rule the planet. How do you square Donald Trump hanging out with Klaus Schwab and speaking at their conferences?
Can I tell you how they square it?
Yeah, tell me.
The same way Biden voters have the audacity to call Trump a racist when Biden is the one who passed the crime bill back in the 1990s. That was the reason crack gets treated differently from cocaine. Amen. Joe Biden did that. Joe Biden is the one who made it so we can't write off student debt. And who does that affect most? That affects people at the bottom of the economic spectrum. And, unfortunately in the Black community, wealth is lower. So that's it holds back everybody, but it disproportionately affects the Black community. And
it enslaves you for most of your adult life, paying off those loans, until you're 50 something.
Exactly. So with both sides, I think people hear what they want to hear and see what they want to see, because they don't want to take the time to dive into the weeds and really figure out that there may not be as much difference between these two parties, as we would hope. They disagree on, some of the optics, and maybe they disagree publicly, but then they all go to the same dinner parties. Like Nancy Pelosi was at Trump's wedding. Like all this good stuff back in the day.
That's right. The Clintons and the Trumps were very close once upon a time.
They were buddies.
Remember the day after the 2016 election? Trump gave an interview to Leslie Stahl of CBS News, and he was asked, well, are you going to lock her up? Like you've been saying you're going to do? And Trump showed us who he was right there on day one in that interview when he said, no, I'm not going to lock her up. Hillary's a nice lady. I like the Clintons. They've been friends of mine for a long time.
But it made a good campaign slogan, though. It made a good chant at the rallies, though. It got
Unfortunately, a lot of us were hoping that he would lock her up. I've been waiting for that since the 1990s, and nobody has ever been able to lock her and her crooked cronies up. And I'm not even so sure Bobby would do that, because he's also an old friend of the Clintons, and I don't think he's going to do anything to put that friendship in jeopardy, unfortunately.